So, most abuse resources basically are oriented toward your kind of master manipulating abusers. Your Machiavellian, mustache twisting, very strategic, very intentional abuser who's making a choice to entrap the victim. And so, victims who are in this dynamic, there's like a switch up for them because this person was very intentionally hiding who they were, hiding their intentions. And suddenly, that person then reveals themselves once they feel they have the victim, trapped in some way. So, usually in a marriage or baby trapped, financially, legally, something where once they have power over the victim or power to get power over the victim, they then sort of reveal themselves and, like, "Ah, ha, ha, I'm I'm a villain." And so that switch up is extremely disorienting because this is not the person you thought you were dealing with. And so for those victims, they're genuinely completely their sense of the world has been completely destabilized. They're looking back like, "Did I miss something?" And the thing is, with someone who's that intentional, and it's more of a psychopathy or sociopathy model of an abuser. It's the reason why everyone keeps calling abusers like, "Oh, they're a narcissist," because they're reaching, in my opinion, for that form of the abuse construct where it was someone who was very intentional and who hid who they were intentionally and effectively until the victim was trapped. But there are also other kinds of abusers. So, the other two that I particularly talk about are going to be like your unintentional abusers. So, people who are often unintentionally unsafe because they have these emotional needs that were not met by their parents. And so they are going out into the world, into relationships with terrible boundaries, looking for someone else to heal them. But also they feel entitled. And so they get in relationships with people, and then they're like, okay, now you owe me these things. So there may be somewhat of a switch up, but like with that kind of abuser, you're often seeing the bad boundaries ahead of time or the boundary pushing, the boundary testing. They're unsafe and but they're going to present as vulnerable and a victim. And often also the unintentional abuser is demonstrating a lack of self-awareness and a non-understanding of what is appropriate because they might not know. And so for victims in this situation, they may genuinely also have some, like, let's say, usually we use the codependency language, which I'm not a fan of because that comes out of, well, anyway, that's another discussion. But the emotional kind of codependency, where this seems like a good idea, what this unstable, unsafe person is presenting. It seems like a good idea. And that you might be able to heal each other and you finally won't be alone. You now have somebody in the world with you. And then it becomes like a hot mess. And so these victims are often going, oh, okay, I've got like inner work to do and I gotta heal and I gotta recognize what's like safe and not safe. I gotta have boundaries when I didn't feel necessarily like I wanted them. I gotta choose a safe option, even though I'm intrinsically yearning for this unsafe option, but that's a trap. And so they're often seeing like red flags and maybe a little bit of a red flag. And sometimes we're messy. So everyone's kind of like a mess there. There's like a third kind of abuser. And to me, I classify this as like the emotional abuser because they're not entitlement first. They're not, I'm choosing to abuse first. They are emotion first and then retroactively go, oh, I'm going to justify it. And I'm going to justify it in a way that I'm right and you're wrong. And so it becomes very abusive. And there are genuinely people, in my opinion, I'm not a scientist, so, but there are genuinely people who may be having very strong biological responses to things and then go, well, this feeling must have been justified. And so then they start to look for a construct that justifies it. And that construct is often at the expense of the victim. And so when you're the victim and you're dealing with this kind of person, it's very confusing because they don't seem to be logically consistent. It's whatever their feeling is in the moment. And this might not show up until you're close enough because though that emotional response, that intense emotional response isn't necessarily triggered until you're more enmeshed, like in a or interdependent in a relationship. So you may have thought, "Oh, I'm with this like normal person," and then, oh, wait a minute, what's happening? And then they, do their mental gymnastics afterwards, and you're sitting there trying to figure out like what the heck is going on. And I do, on a side note, want to say that if you're a victim of abuse and you've been trapped by a master manipulating abuser, you may end up becoming like a very angry person. And so the manipulating abuser is going to present you as if you're like this emotional abuser, when really you are trapped by them and you are at their whim and mercy underneath their power, and they're not allowing you out. And also, you're now not responding in optimal ways. And so, this is one way a switch up can happen for victims of abuse, again, in my opinion. So, when so both of my parents have personality disorders, and also I used to go with my dad to AA meetings. So I sort of got a front row seat to a lot. And my mom is somebody I would put in that like emotional abuser category where it's the feelings first and then we're retroactively justifying it to ourselves, even if it doesn't make any sense. And then my dad was sort of more, well, no, he also did that too, but he was also like well, anyway. So when I had so I thought, oh, I'm going to get it away from these people because they are unsafe and they're abusive. And I don't want to live like this. And I'm tired of taking care of everybody. I'm going to go live my life. And it was great. And it was fabulous. And I did not think I had a problem until I got my first cat. So I got a kitten. And I suddenly found myself full of rage inexplicably. It did not make sense. The kitty was doing kitty things. My intellectual mind understood this was normal, but I was full of so much rage and I did not understand what was happening. But I realized, oh no, I may I may have a problem here. I need to start doing some research. So Abuse Interrupted started so I could stop the cycle of abuse in my own family because escaping wasn't enough. I clearly had work to do and hadn't wanted to do it because I didn't think there was a problem. So what sort of I came to the understanding was that my initial theory was that it was related to my hormones because it seemed to, as I was tracking it, seemed to happen a couple of days to a week before my period. And so I thought, okay, maybe it's hormonal. And I looked it up and I was like, oh, this is the luteal phase. Okay. So I need to be on guard during the luteal phase because the rest of the time I was very chill. But for some reason during this phase, I was like ready to destroy. Um, I really related to the Hulk and I didn't want to. Um, so I had posted about this theory on the subreddit. And actually, let me pull it up because the person who had this idea, um, I want to give credit to because they were great. Let's see. Let's try. You know what? I'll just go ahead and credit them in the comments. Anyway, so what they said was well, um, they said the word caterpillar menergenic response because I had been looking in RPMDD, which is the subreddit for I guess women with premenstrual dysphoria disorder. Well, I forget what all the letters mean, and they were recommending to each other that they take over the counter antihistamine, and I was like, I'm gonna try that. And so I started carrying antihistamine around with me. So like it was your basic Benadryl or Claritin or whatever was available. And if I was at work and I started feeling angry toward the copier, I was like, oh, let me go take one Because I'm normally like, "Hey, baby, I just need you to do this copy. Let's just I love you and I appreciate you and I just like let's just get this copy done. It's gonna be good." But if I was suddenly like, "I'm gonna destroy you if you don't fucking do this copy," I was like, "Oh, okay. I'm in the danger zone." So I would start to pay attention to when I was escalating. And so then I would go take like the antihistamine and it would work, and the reason I knew it worked is because nothing would happen. So it would be very easy for someone to think, "Oh, well, I mean, it's not doing anything." But I knew that was out of the norm for me, so that the fact that nothing happened after I was already, like, smack talking my copier was an indication that something, it was doing something. And so when I posted this post, someone in the comments said, "Oh, yeah, because it calms the catecholaminergic response." I was like, "What the heck is this?" And it brought me to things that looked like ADHD. And I was like, oh, I got, okay. Oh, I am dealing with that also. And then I feel like people on the autism spectrum also have recognized possibly that they may have ragey kind of responses, especially when you're sensory overwhelmed, which also was me. And now looking back on it, also both of my parents. So, my it like put all like the pieces started to fall into place and I was like, "Oh, there's like a multi-systemic thing happening here." And also I don't want to repeat it. So, the way that I would approach it, because I didn't want to repeat the cycle with my son and he was doing normal kid things and I was also under stress from the way his father was being abusive, like mostly financially abusive, well, also emotional abuse. Anyway, he was being abusive, so I was under that stress. And then I wasn't getting enough sleep. And then like 5 years in, I started dating someone who was also being abusive and who was like cheating on me. And I was like, my biggest fear was that I was going to murder my child, that I was going to be one of those women. I grew up in the 80s. And so every once in a while, there'd be a news story about a woman who'd like drowned all of her kids. And I was like, oh my God, this is my biggest fear. I don't want this. That and accidentally leaving my kid in the back of a car seat, in the heat, like in Florida. So I was like, okay, I got to come up with like a plan of attack here. And so I basically got so honest with people where if I was dropping him off in the morning with his like it was a mother's morning out program, I would basically say to them, "Listen, we had a bad morning. It's not his fault. I feel so angry right now and I've been holding it in. And so I haven't been loving and nurturing to him because I'm afraid if I interact with him, I'm gonna lash out and be dangerous. So could you please?" And they were so amazing. They were like, "Yeah, absolutely. We're gonna love on him. We're gonna be loving and nurturing with him." And I would be like, "Thank you so much." And they were like, "Okay, mama, it's okay. Like go take this couple of hours and do something to kind of help you calm down." Um or I think they might have said self-care. But for me, I was like, calm down." Another thing I would do is I would tell my son, I taught my son, I said, "Listen, I am not safe right now. I need some I need some independent activity time. I need some time to find my calm." Because I also, I didn't realize about the sensory thing and being overwhelmed and constantly interacting with this other little person. And so I would just like, I want to Shiva the destroyer kind of. So I would tell him like, I need to let him know what's going on so that he understands it's not him and that he has a context to put this in, and also maybe it'll help role model kind of like how to deal with this. And so I would say, I need some time to find my calm. We're gonna set a timer. And then we'll come back together. And so he would, depending on how old he was, so it might be if he was little, like a 5-minute timer or something. But I would set a timer and yeah, and then we'd come back together. If it was really bad, I would call his dad and I would say, "Listen, I'm not safe right now, and you need to come home ASAP. Um, please." I had even considered giving him up to foster care because I was drowning. I was drowning, and then I didn't. I didn't just get away from one abuser. I started dating another one because I didn't, a lot of the things are me reporting from the future of like, don't do this. These are the reasons. Because I already did it. I already did it. And so when you try to date and you haven't healed from the first one, you often just go to the second one. So, and then the second one wanted me to be not as nice to my son. And it was really interesting because both me and his father went on to date people who didn't like us being kind to our kid. And it was so like, why? Like when he dated an abusive, controlling person, she wanted to have our son at the house with them to, I think, validate their relationship. But at the same time, she resented any time he spent interacting with our child. So it was, and I was like, why does she want Dyson then? Like, why does she want him over there? I don't understand. She doesn't want you interacting with him and she's mean to him. And so anyway, yeah. So, and then the guy that I was dating was like, "Yeah, you're too you coddle him." And at this point, he's 5. So, is there a point at which you don't quote unquote coddle your child? Yes. Is 5 that point? I don't know that it is. And thirdly, I'm not sure that I was coddling him anyway. But just seeing they wanted all of the nurturing love and attention to them. They didn't want it on the children. And so we had unintentionally put our son in a bad position because we're being reactive instead of making safe choices. So, sort of this like combination of tools that I was using to sort of dig myself out of this default stress response that I got from my father, whether it was biological or learned or both or whatever. Um and so I think I was able to do that because I had been attending all of these meetings all of these years where you say it's the fourth step in AA where you say you make a fearless and searching moral inventory of yourselves. And so when I look at other people who are being abusive, like from an emotional standpoint, that's what they're missing. They are having an emotional response, whether biological or whatever, and because they can't handle the reality of what they're doing, because they're like, they don't want to be a bad person to themselves, they come up with justifications that make the other person the abuser or responsible for their behavior. And so when you're on the other side of this, it's extremely confusing because you're like, this is what is happening. It doesn't seem to make sense. Um, and so those are the feelings. The feelings are driving, the feelings are facts, people, that kind of abuser. And I that's one reason why I orient on safety so much because if you're an unintentional abuser or if you're a person who's like hijacked by your emotional responses, it's so hard to think your way out of being unsafe. It's hard to think your way out of being an abusive person because the alloplastic defenses w- will protect you from accepting something that you don't want to be true. And it's sort of like being the movie is called A Beautiful Mind, where I think in the movie he had schizophrenia, maybe. And he realizes within the construct of the false reality he's created that it's not true, that it's false. And so there then for is able to come up with coping mechanisms to go to check with like real people that he knows exist in reality. Like, hey, do you see this other person? So even though it may feel embarrassing, it's like he's so committed to like reality that that's what he has to do to make sure that he doesn't again put his child in danger or put his wife in danger. And so that's sort of why I approach this topic the way that I do, because I think there are a lot of unsafe people who don't recognize they're being unsafe and they're attracted to the abuse resources. So you get a mix of people that are engaging with this. And the other thing, too, is you can be a victim and also be a perpetrator. And I don't think abuse resources like handle that very well. So when you can orient on safety, you can start to go, okay, what's safe here and what isn't. And then that can start to kind of clear some of the fog of like how people are making choices or justifying their actions or, attempting to power over the victim because they feel like they're right, whatever it is. When you look at the safety piece is going to really help you. The safety and the boundaries will really help you drill down on, okay, what's sort of the interplay of what is happening here between the people. And anyway, so I realized I hadn't really talked about that. I've talked about it in the subreddit, but I hadn't really talked about it on the channel. And so I wanted to bring it up here because I think this is a gaping hole in abuse resources, and it's why I have a channel. It's why I've, been doing what I've been doing, and it's why I'm able to identify things the way that I am. It's because I've been on both sides of the dynamic. It's because I've been watching people over the years be abusive in different ways. And I would say, unlike most abuse resources, I think a lot of people don't actually want to be abusive. A lot of it is that they cannot tolerate reality when they've done something wrong. And so they have to recontextualize their concept of it so that they can tolerate living. Whereas your master calculating manipulative abuser, that's not their that is not a weak spot for them. They're being intentional. Uh so if you're someone who's dealing with that kind of person, or you possibly are that kind of person, you can make choices to be safe. You can make choices to confront reality and do better. And the first thing you do, like in my example with my son, is you go, okay, I got to be so honest with the people so that there is accountability. Other people have their eye on whomever it is that's the potential victim. And so, I at one point I took my child to a domestic violence shelter and said, listen, we need to call CPS because I don't know that we can I don't know that we can do this safely. And of course, because you're aware, they're like, oh no, it's fine. And so anyway, that was his own thing. But being honest and taking accountability. And if you go back and look at the video I did with my son, where he talks about how the fact that I was honest about things that I had done, and it wasn't many times, I would say it would be less than one hand, but still every time I physically lashed out at him is a time I wish I could take back. Um, so if you lie to your kid about it, and because you don't want to think that you're a bad person, you make them feel like it's their fault. You continue the cycle and you're putting your shame onto them. And so I didn't want to do that. My father attempted to not do that to the best that he was able. And he wasn't able to like do the whole thing. So my hope is that my son is better than all of us and doesn't have this issue because of the way he's been raised for the majority of his life. But as I've always tried to be very forthright, I've made those mistakes and you can't take them back. But you can decide to do better moving forward. Anyway, I hope this makes sense and I will talk to you next time.